welcome into the Sunday Journal. I'm your host, Matt Pitta. Thanks for being with us today. We get together each week to talk about issues facing Cape Cod, the islands, and all of southeastern Massachusetts. As you know, every couple of weeks I like to get out on the road and do our programs in the field to meet the people of Cape Cod that are our newsmakers in person. And today it's a privilege to have come up to Provincetown, where we're at the Center for Coastal Studies in Provincetown for a very important announcement and event. It is the 40th anniversary of what is a world-class marine research organization here based right on Cape Cod that is known across the world. They're marking their 40th anniversary coming up, and we thought it would be great to come on up into Provincetown and talk a little bit about the history of the organization, the research they've been involved in, and where they're going in the future. And of course, there's a big event coming up as well to mark the 40th anniversary. And we have a great roundtable group here with me today. We have the president and the CEO of the Center for Coastal Studies, Rich Delaney. And Rich, it's always good to see you. Thanks for inviting me up here today to your facility. I appreciate it very much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's wonderful to have you here.
And also a person who's very familiar to many of our listeners and readers of our website, Charles Stormy Mayo, the senior scientist and one of the founders here at the Center for Coastal Studies. Stormy, it's good to see you. You're dry today. You're not out in a boat chasing whales, which is good for right now.
No, my people are out there now, but I get a chance to talk with you. Thanks.
That's great. I know, in fact, we'll talk about this, but even as we speak today, when we came up here to Provincetown, we just received information that there are a lot of right whales that are being spotted in Cape Cod Bay right now. So we received word on that, too, so we'll get into that. And Graham Geist is a senior scientist emeritus here at the Center for Coastal Studies, and we've spoken with Graham on many occasions as well. Graham, thanks so much. Good to see you here in person. Thank you very much.
Well, it's wonderful to have you visit us, and we're looking forward to discussing our anniversary with you.
Absolutely. And Catherine McCourt is the Communications Officer, Executive Assistant here at the Center. And Catherine, it's so good to see you. We're going to talk a lot with you today about just things that are going to be happening revolving the 40th anniversary. And thanks for having us here today.
Well, thanks so much for coming, Matt. We're looking forward to it.
Rich, we're going to start with you and talk a little bit about kind of how we got here, and that, I think, requires a little bit of discussion about the history of the Center for Coastal Studies. We're going to talk with Stormy about that as well. So let's just talk a little bit about the background, the 40 years anniversary here of the Center for Coastal Studies.
Well, Matt, the story is actually a wonderful story, the origins especially. It's a story about stewardship. It's a story about three young scientists who all had just achieved their PhDs in various fields, coming back to Provincetown in the case of Dr. Mayo and his new wife at that time, Dr. Barbara Mayo, and then the same with Dr. Graham Geist showing up here. So the convergence of these three people who shared a concern about the coastal environment here in Provincetown, and you know Provincetown is, the location alone puts it right in the middle of a wonderful coastal environment, special place. But their concern about stewardship evolved into recognizing the need for having an institution that would provide better science and better understanding of the coastal processes that are happening around us, number one. Number two, making that information available to decision makers, whether they be government people or business people or even homeowners, regular people, so they could be aware of how their decisions impact the environment. And then number three, influencing others to be equally responsible about the environment, becoming stewards. So basically those three legs, research, public policy, and education, were the part of the original mission, and 40 years later, we're still carrying out that mission.
So as we roll into 2016 here, spring of 2016, how would you describe the current mission of what the organization is all about?
Well, in terms of a mission statement, it's really basically the same. We want to learn more about and better understand the coastal environments and ocean processes and coastal environments, and we want to make that available to decision makers. What has changed is the threats that we are facing. Back when Stormy and Barbara and Graham started the Center for Coastal Studies, there were issues around wetlands protection. There were issues around whether or not to have structures like docks, solid fill piers. There were beginnings of us recognizing that overfishing was happening. Those are all issues that were dealt with early on. However, today, in many ways, the issues and the threats to the ocean and coastal environments are more serious with climate change manifesting itself with sea level rise, warming waters, lots of things we're just learning about. So I think the first 40 years we dealt with a set of issues that were challenging. Hopefully we made a contribution and helped manage those better, solve some problems. But I think the next 40 years we'll see the challenges even more serious.
Let's bring Stormy back into the conversation. Stormy, let's go back a little bit in time and history and take us back 40 years ago, as Rich was saying, recently out of school here in the area. How did this idea come together?
Well, I think it was certainly a three-part effort. The thoughts were bouncing back between the three of us. My wife, who passed away a number of years ago, and Graham and I, and we all had our own angles on, as scientists do, on what seemed to be the important issues, the ones that Rich has told us about. And I will say, for me, I was less convinced that it would work than I think Graham and Barbara were, and it certainly worked. But in the beginning, it was a small operation, and we did very simple field courses and the like, as much to keep our minds working as to keep other people's minds working. Obviously, the institution has grown remarkably beyond anything I think any of the three of us could have imagined. And you can imagine when you have now a 40-year-old baby growing up, as many of us have, what an extraordinary situation it is looking back and sitting in new quarters and doing new work on new issues.
Take me back a little bit, if you would, Stormy, and those early days. You're here, Graham here. Talk about what the initial mission was. What were the activities? What were you trying to accomplish in those very early days 40 years ago?
Well, I think initially, and Rich really has captured it very well. We had the germ that eventually grew, a germ that had three parts. But certainly education, and that in the broadest sense was really the first thing that brought us together. We did have a great interest also in some of the most obvious issues that were confronting Cape Cod and coastal environments. But education kind of was the glue in those days. So we had a number of very simple courses. And I think even our present executive director, Rich Delaney, who just spoke, was in fact in one of those courses. Mm-hmm. So that really was the glue, but one has to only live on Cape Cod and not be a scientist to notice that there are many issues that three scientists in their own fields could confront, and that's what we did in those days.
I'm going to come back to you, Stormy. Graham, the same for you. Let's go back 40 years. When you folks were getting this organization underway, what was your vision? What was driving you to put this together?
Well, I think we were all excited. It was a important time in our lives, getting started in our careers. I think we all had a strong attraction to this area. We wanted to be here. And we were excited, I think, each of us individually in our own way, about the possibility of not only our doing marine research here, coastal research, because it was the coastal environments that excited all of us so much, but the fact that we could make use of that environment for others, both, as has been said, for education, but also to help with advisory work, advising others. And so one of our first activities, frankly, that we were received a small amount of payment for, because a lot of our work had no payment, as you can imagine. But I've forgotten the name of the department in the state government that asked us to help with the coastal wetlands regulations. At that time when we started, the Coastal Zone Management Act had just been approved by Congress and was going into action. And that action called for the various states to develop their own programs. Rich was very much involved in that first step. We at that time were asked to help with developing regulations to implement the existing coastal wetlands regulations. Well, I should say the Coastal Wetlands Act. I think then what we were asked to do was develop not so much the regulations ourselves, but the outline for the regulations, which others in the state government would further develop and implement. So I remember that called on all of us to contribute within our own fields. So my involvement was, of course, with geology and coastal processes. I remember that Stormy was particularly involved with the what's called land under the sea, and Barbara was as well. So that was a big activity, and the courses that we gave have been mentioned several times. I would point out that the main course was one called Coastal Marine Ecology, and again, that course happened to interfinger very well with the interest both in the state and in the nation at large in the Coastal Zone Management Act. And so that we had people coming to that course, even the first year from Washington, to find out what the coastal processes were all about and how they might learn more about them.
Catherine, we've taken a few moments here at the beginning to talk with the scientist and the director, and as a person who works very hard in terms of communicating the message here. When you look around this table that we're sitting here, people can't see us on the radio, but really a tremendous gathering of the minds here at this level of research. It's a world-class level of research that goes on here.
It really is. I pinch myself every day. The fact that I'm actually sitting here at these tables with these people it's fabulous. Yeah, I mean, the great thing about Graham and Stormy and Rich as well, obviously, is that they're bringing along whole new generations of scientists to continue the work that they've done for the last 4 decades. So I don't know how many students have been through here as interns and as postgrads, postdocs who are now on running their own organizations, running their own classes, teaching the next generation again how to be good stewards of their coastal environment. It's fabulous.
Today on the Sunday Journal, we're on the road. We're at the Provincetown, the Center for Coastal Studies in Provincetown, as we talk about the 40th anniversary of this world-class research institution with several of the founders and the executive director, the president, and the CEO as well. So, folks, I want to get into a conversation now and again, kind of take us through time. And I've done a little bit of research and having covered the news here on the Cape for quite a long time, and I know you guys will be much more expert in this than I am. But 40 years ago, in many ways, the Cape, when it came to, I think, environmental protection, we were kind of in the Wild West almost. You didn't have organizations like the Cape Cod Commission. There wasn't a lot of regulatory control going on. And I know that many of you may be aware, I think it was, if I'm somewhat correct in this, one of the things that I think really spurred things when the original APCC was there was a plan to fill in the Nauset Marsh. There were all kinds of plans out there. And I think the Cape really stood at a crossroads back then, 40 years ago, that we were going to go one way or the other. Cape Cod was maybe going to become the shore of New Jersey. No offense to our friends in New Jersey, but it was going to become that, one large, hotel after another all the way down the coast, or we were going to go the other way. So let's go back, and whoever wants to jump in first, where were we at that point 40 years ago? Rich?
Well, I think you describe it well, Matt, and it was just before the big population explosion here in Cape Cod that happened basically in the 80s and 90s. And so we were, I think some of us sensed that was coming. We could see the economic signal. Many of us were working hard to put in place regulations like the wetlands regulations or designations to protect whales or everything we could think of in advance of that. I think the jury's still out. We probably could have done better. As you know, we've gone through that. We went through that boom, and the population exploded. We had subdivisions. We had a lot more septic systems installed, and now we have produced, in a way, another set of environmental challenges, wastewater being the biggest one right now. But I think we were also should pat ourselves on the back a little bit because we did step up. We supported things like the Cape Cod National Seashore, which preserved a good deal of it. We helped put in place regulations that out in the water, for example, Stormy's work in identifying the right whale habitat resulted in the federal government declaring most of all of Cape Cod Bay as a critical right whale habitat. It's a certain amount of protection. The Center for Coastal Studies was the primary organization that nominated Stellwagen Bank as a national marine sanctuary. That designation is in place, and that afforded a certain amount of protection. So I think the work we did in the early days have resulted in some concrete, positive management steps that are still paying dividends today.
Today on the Sunday Journal, we're talking with folks from the Center for Coastal Studies in Provincetown. We're going to come back in just a moment, continue our discussion, talk about what's happening here in 2016, some of the threats that we're facing right now, and how this organization is right at the forefront as we continue here. We're in Provincetown for today's segment. We're going to come back with more here from the Center for Coastal Studies in Provincetown. You're listening to the Sunday Journal, and I'm your host, Matt Pitta.